Welcome to the Centurion's Path, a podcast about the life and the trials and tribulations of those who serve. This podcast is about the heroes who protect our communities. To truly understand the path of the protector, tune in with AJ DeAndrea and John McDonald, two nationally known leaders who live the Centurion's Path every day.
Thank you all for joining us today. To our sponsor for today's podcast, Safe Haven Defense, preserving property, protecting lives, providing peace of mind.
Well, welcome to episode 7 of the Centurion's Path. We are really happy to have a lifelong friend with us today. Going to talk probably about some modern issues that are going on with school security and just life, but Jeff is with us, and of course John is joining us as well. So hoping everybody had a wonderful New Year's and a very Merry Christmas. But welcome, episode 7. Who would have? We say this every time, right? But I mean, who would have thought?
We're still shocked every single time, and as we should be, really.
Yeah, right.
It's pretty cool. So Jeff Pierson is joining us, and we wanted Jeff to be on this show because he brings such a unique perspective in the world of school safety. He's not your traditional school safety person. He's not traditional in any sense of the word.
Right.
He grew up.
No, he's not.
That's right.
He grew up in the world of education, and Jeff and I worked together for more than 14 years, and went through a lot of stuff together. And when I left Jeffco, Jeff took over as the executive director of school safety for Jeffco Schools, the school district of Columbine High School, and so many other issues that have really put Jeffco on the map over the years. But Jeff, your background is so unique and so different. And, you know, I intentionally recruited you to come to the world of school safety. You were a high school principal.
Mm-hmm.
And you transitioned taking that work of a high school principal and moved it over to the world of school safety, protecting kids at school as a principal, protecting kids in the role you're in now. But, you know, one of the things that we often talk about is leadership. Leadership matters, and that's a core foundation of what you believe in. Can you talk about where that starts for you and how that impacts everything you do?
Absolutely. And
Hey, Jeff, I'm going to interrupt you. Give us your background first before we jump into that meat and potatoes. Just kind of, because it's a crazy story, especially the latter part of your life. You know, coming from the education side to security. But just give us a little bit of background before we jump into that, so our listeners have a better idea of who you are.
I will. I want to first start and say, you know, heart goes out to everybody in Iowa on the heels of another one of these tragic shootings that I think the four of us on here and the three of us always think about of, you know, what's the most tragic event that can happen, and that's somebody going into one of our schools and taking out some of our most precious commodities. So heart goes out on the heels of another tragedy out in Iowa. A little background about me. I grew up in the world of education, but what's unique about me that John knew was that I grew up in a law enforcement family. All right. My dad's a retired chief of police, 30 plus years. Did everything from the old Harley Davidson motorcycle cop to all the way up to captain, and then eventually up to chief, and eventually was the state post director for the state of Wyoming for many years before finally fully retiring. So I grew up in a family that understood protecting, right? That's, you know, situational awareness. And I grew up understanding that component and that aspect of life. However, a couple other individuals were so important in my life were my high school and my college basketball coaches. They taught me a lot about leadership, and I think I am to who I am today because of what I learned from my father, but also what I learned through leadership and through trait development, through, I think, people that were so important, and that were the coaches and the leadership that they gave me through my high school and my college career. But I think as I got into college, I wanted to give back of what some of the people that gave the most to me, and that was in coaching and leadership and teaching, right? And that's taking care of kids. And, you know, I had thought about going down the world of of law enforcement. That was a secondary option for me. And at one point, I wasn't even sure I wanted to teach any further. After 1 year, my mom convinced me to go back for another year and make sure, because I was meeting with one of my dad's best friend, the FBI director in the area, often, and just said, hey, I'm not sure education is for me. What would this look like if I went down another avenue? So I had kind of two lenses, two ideologies around what I thought my life could look like. But I think the things I learned through college and then into education obviously prepared me for, I think, what I do today. And, being an athletic director, a coach, an assistant principal for many, many years, I got to see what it meant to take care of kids. Not just from a sense of, oh, you're an authority figure, but from a sense of relationship, from a sense of them understanding that there's somebody in their corner no matter what. And early on in life, I think when you think about, what I love about law enforcement, but also I think about the Centurion way is we're protectors, right? Naturally. I think there's an innate calling that a lot of us have around protecting the most vulnerable people. And I have some really soft places in my heart for the elderly, for our special needs population, for our students in general, right? Those are three areas and three individuals that you'll find me at the forefront of anything when it comes to protecting that group. So as I grew up through high school and college and got into, the education field, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with that. I started teaching. I only taught for 3 years. They drugged me in quickly to the administrative role after 3 years. So I wasn't in the classroom for a very long time. And they said, Jeff, we need you to go get your master's and do this work around administration. And I listened and figured, they knew better than I did. And so I've been in the world of administration for many, many years. But I think John talked about a little bit, when you think about protecting kids, it's not just about the physical protection, right? As an educator, I grew up understanding, and I think when I led schools, it was from the lens of what's best in the lens of kids, right? Not just about their physical protection, but what are the right avenues we can provide for them? How do we keep kids acclimated and connected to school so that we don't find them outside of school going down the wrong path or creating unhealthy environments that we should be providing for them here in school to make sure that they're connected to what we do? And so I spent most of my high school career helping kids better understand that they have something in school that may be better than what they have at home, that maybe have them connected to what their lifelong journey could look like. But at the same time, I think we talk about the qualities you have as a kiddo growing up, the instances that you go through or all the learning tasks that you go through, they lead you up to, and you learn from those to, I think, become better at whatever that calling is for your life. And ultimately, I think my calling was to bring the world of education, that protection, the value that we get for the intrinsic value of connections through leadership with kids and families into the world of school safety. And, I give everything back to John to see, and then having the foresight to say, wow, I want to see an educator that's done this, that's lived the world of education, come and really speak to the world of law enforcement and safety and help them better understand how do these two worlds merge together. Because I think yesterday was just another example of somebody that just feels like there's something wrong. They feel like they need to go out and do something that's so, in our minds, so unethical and so wrong, but in their minds, something triggered them to want to go do what they did. So how do we bridge the world of completely protecting our kiddos in school and making sure that they're safe, but also understanding what's the relationship and the pieces that are connected to mental health and other things, so that we get kids at an earlier age and help them understand that there's a future, that there's something for them out there outside of just being this individual that doesn't know what to do, that is not anywhere to turn. And so they turn to a very unhealthy way of living. And then they take that out on, unfortunately, some of our most vulnerable people. So that kind of in a nutshell is me up to today. And, I attribute a lot of where I'm at today in the world of school safety to John and the mentorship he's given me. But when it comes to leadership, those three individuals, my father and those two coaches, man, I am who I am today because of what they taught me. And I think those life lessons learned up to today are what drive me and what keep me going and headed down the right path.
Jeff, you were a high school principal, obviously, and I was looking at the world of school safety and saw a lot of successes in what we were doing, but the the biggest disconnect that I felt was that we weren't connecting, one, with kids as well as we should, and we weren't connecting with our educators. That the differences in law enforcement educators are pretty significant. How we think, how we act, how we talk, the language we use, it's very different. And when I started thinking about how could we be a better department, a better organization, and take this to a new level, I created a position and called it the Director of Safe School Environments. And intentionally went out and recruited you because you and I had worked through some really tough tragedy together.
Yeah.
And I remember telling you in the conversation we had is I need you to be the interpreter. I need you to be the voice of the educator to tell us when we're coming down with, decisions on school safety, why this won't work, and what the struggle is from an educator lens. But I also need you to become a first responder so you can share our vision with the educators. How difficult was it to bridge that and to be that interpreter in the the beginning when we started this for you, and walking that path between education and safety? Because I know it took a little while to figure it out.
It's interesting because those early months, John, it was like, oh my gosh, we're writing a new chapter here, right? This is brand new. We didn't know where we were headed. There wasn't a job description. There wasn't a path to say, hey, here's how this work should be done. Follow A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, right? It was, hey, here's our need. Here's where we're at. How do we get us here? And it was difficult early on because I think I didn't struggle in the world of how do I bring the educational language, because that's what I spoke for so long. I think the difficult part was bringing the educational language to this team and helping them better understand, but also then having them trust and respect where I came from, because I didn't have the law enforcement background that they all did, right? So I think early on, I think that was the most difficult part, was making sure that I did what I said I could do and led in a way that I felt was the right way, so that the leadership, whether it was law enforcement, whether it was our internal security teams, respected who I was as an educator. Because I think when you think about the two worlds, they operate very differently at times, right? And I think our job was to figure out how do we, correlate those together in some capacity. Now, they're going to always have to operate a little bit separately. That's just the world of what we do. But how do we interpret, as you said, and bring the two languages together to better format what we're doing? So it was difficult early on, but I will say it was one of the most rewarding experiences ever, because I think once we got to that soft spot and we really started engaging, what I found really happened early was our education system grasped onto this better than I thought they ever would. They immediately took down the walls. They immediately opened up their doors and said, oh, wow, there's somebody that's done our work. He's been a principal. We have trust in him. He's got integrity with us. So when he comes in and says, wow, here's the thing we're going to do, I think I had to prove to them that I wasn't going to come in and be a black and white enforcer, right? To say, here's how things go. We had to have that. And you and I called it funny. We still probably ought to write this book, The Black and White and the Gray in Between, right?
Right.
But I was kind of that gray in between to help them understand I'm coming in from the lens of educator, of principal, of how it operates. But now I've got a chance to go train with first responders through AJ's team and better understand a little bit of that black and white approach, that understanding of when something hits the fan, guess what? Here's how it's got to go down. But how do we lead up to that? What's the leadership style and the capacity to build so that when we get to those levels, our educators and our internal teams are trained and understand the language, and there's a partnership and a trust between the two that I'm not sure we completely had, prior to you bringing me aboard. So difficult early on, but I think once we really started getting the trust and respect from both sides, I got to tell you, for me, it was one of the most rewarding experiences. And I think to this day, probably one of the most important things that any school district has done to really bridge the world and to bring the understanding. Everywhere I go, whether it's through the Colorado Association of School as executives, when I go present and do, everybody says, wow, you're a former principal. You were this and that. I would love to hear more about that. I think that just resonates with people because they understand that principals and educators think differently. right? They're not a black and white approach. They're a very gray scale. They want to learn more about why. Tell me the why. What's the root cause of the understanding? Whereas in law enforcement, it's I say you do, because here's how we do things, right? So I think bridging that world was very valuable. And with the understanding that there's still a black and white approach to some things, right? Some things have to be the way they are. But I think once we broke down the walls and built that trust, I think everything moved forward from there.
Well, I think one of the things that really made it a big impact on the Department of School Safety is the conversation we had, which is you've got to become a first responder.
Yes.
And we threw you into AJ's single officer response program. we put you into the tactical world with rapid and immediate deployment. And all of a sudden you've got AJ in your ear talking to you about real life, moment in time, what it's going to be like, what it's going to feel like, and you are now in a position where you're entering a school moment, when there's a threat, when that threat is gunfire. And I remember the first days of that training for you and the changes that you went through in your own mindset about, now I understand the black and white piece of this.
Yes. Well, I will tell you, and AJ will probably laugh because I know he vividly understands and remembers that for those first few days. But, I'm naturally a go-getter, right? When it comes to...
We call it aggressive.
We'll call it aggressive, call it what you want. But I naturally was just that formidable approach, right? That's what I was in sports, right? I was the enforcer. It was just kind of who I was. I just always played that role. And I remember a number of times going in to do things, and AJ had to yank on me at times going, you're going too fast, slow down. We're not barging through. You're not, hold on. Oh my God, you're too aggressive. And so I learned so much, but also, you grew up in that world. I did, but there's nothing compared to being in the situation. Being put in a life or death situation where between you and somebody else is the opportunity to possibly go and end somebody's life or put someone down when it comes to between them and you or them and some vulnerable kids, right? That situation, people don't understand. Even in a trained environment, the amount of stress, of adrenaline and things that go through, even when you're going through the simplest of trainings that you might do every single day. I, to this day, get adrenaline rushes and things when we go through the training and the stuff that we do. It's become an everyday thing, but I still get that rush, right? And so it upsets me when people think that they can just naturally, hey, I could take this on or I can go do this, because it was, wow, it was a moving experience, but one that I think I felt like, wow, this might be another calling. This might be another place for me that I felt pretty comfortable at some point saying, wow, yep, I could go in and do this. I can go in and protect. But what I also knew that from that black and white approach, there was also that little voice in my mind to understand how schools operate, where are kids going to be? What do school senses do? What are teachers going to do? That principal like myself that maybe isn't good at just hiding and doing things, how do we manage those people in circumstances, right? So I think that background that I bring to it, I think was very valuable, because we say it all the time. Your job is to lock down in a lockdown environment. I myself was one of those that ran to the gunfire, that ran to the issues, right? That was my whole life. If something came up, somebody was being assaulted or something, guess what? I wasn't one back to get my video phone out or whatever. I was in the mix and trying to fix it and go to it. So I think that understanding, training with AJ and his team, helped me understand the black and white approach, but yet also I got to bring that kind of that gray lens in on what's truly going to happen in a situation should it come to fruition at one of our schools.
I vividly remember those first few days and can go back, fond memories of all that. But I remember it was probably about halfway through day 2 when there was a change, and I saw the change, right? Where it wasn't just about aggression. It wasn't just about actually black and white. You turned into a thinker, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what tactics are.
Yep.
What's the best way to process this environment? And when that change happened, you could see it was pretty clear. Yeah. I had no doubt in my mind that if this thing was ever to kick off, that you would not only have the physical abilities to go do it, but the mental capability to step into that environment, keep your cool, think, and come out with a positive outcome. And so those are always good. We don't always get that with everyone that goes through the training, as you can imagine, right? But those were good. Those were good days. Still, we train. I mean, we train you guys on a regular basis still annually, and those are always fond days for us to see where we came in the beginning of that program to where it's at now. But I kind of want to go back, and everything that you and John talked about, the first part of this, is that first pillar. We talk about our 7 pillars of concentration, of controlling school shootings or preventing them. And that first pillar is climate and culture. And you emulate that, right? You live it, you understand it from both sides. And, the next thing we talk about is relationships. And those are so important in this profession. But really, that climate and culture and what you bring to the game is pretty cool, because you get both sides, right? I would imagine sometimes it's exhausting because you get pulled in 2 different directions, but it's pretty cool. And with that, what do you see right now, Jeff, as some of your biggest obstacles, kind of moving forward in this world of, school security? And because we talk about it a lot, we feel like, and maybe you'll echo this, but there's always kind of an event will happen, and we get motivated and we're focused, and then we fall back into complacency. Or we'll see complacency in other areas where say it's never going to happen here. Well, we know in Jeffco Schools District it's happened multiple times. So what do you kind of see as some of the obstacles?
Well, I want to start with climate culture, AJ, because I live that world. And I think, as you said, that to me, when it comes to the number one component to preventing potential, not just school shootings, but bullying, but the bigger issues, the things that happen every day that eventually lead up to tragedy, it's about the climate culture that we provide our kids and our communities and environments every single day. It can't happen at one school and not the other. It can't happen at the schools where the economics are high in range and the kids have great families at home, and not happen where, we have diversity and a migrant population. It has to happen everywhere, right? And for us to truly understand climate culture, we have to dig in and go be a part of that environment and help understand the capacity of the need of kids, of the type of things that they're dealing with on a daily basis. The things that they go through, single families that have a single parent that works all the time, those kids are raising themselves sometimes. Kids that can't go to school sometimes because they're taking care of their kiddos, right? There are kids that have grown up in a gang culture. Their parents, their grandparents have brought them through that. So how do we invite all those individuals into one setting and help them better understand that there's a future for them, right? And that's what schools are supposed to do, is provide that culture and environment. So when we go into the biggest issues we're dealing with today, for me, the biggest issue is our kids are learning so much outside of how we used to learn, through social media, through influences that are not healthy, right? When we were growing up, I didn't have a phone. It's probably a good thing we did. Thank you that I grew up when I did, right? Part of me goes, thank you. But I'm dealing with that with my kids. They are being taught and be influenced by things sometimes that we don't even know about as parents, because of social media, phones, and all these other extensions. And so those extensions of the world are pushing on to kids, and they're pressuring them into school, into things that are very unhealthy. And those unhealthy things sometimes lead up to kids being influenced by somebody that's preparing them for something down the road, that's engaging them in unhealthy activities, which might be very unhealthy down the road. They don't even know that they're engaging in. But those number one things are that climate culture. My worry today is the amount of kids that have access to weapons, right? It's number one. I think it's probably not just here in Colorado. I think it's a national issue. But the amount of weapons that are out there that are just available to kids on a daily basis is staggering. Right, some of the data that we've done here in Jeffco is just mind-blowing of kids that said, I have access to a loaded weapon within 5 minutes at any given time. Right, and the numbers are outrageous. We're seeing more of this happening and popping up on social media. We're hearing more about it. I think our suicide rates are out. I mean, just they're off the charts. Why? Because kids don't feel connected. Right? There's that culture and climate. They don't feel connected. So when I think about weapons, I think about the suicidal thoughts. We all know that suicidal thoughts sometimes become homicidal thoughts, right? Now you're tearing the two together. And so I think yesterday's shooting was a direct indication of a kiddo that had some thoughts. I mean, he posted a video, and think about the sticks, the little shooting that we used to do as kids, right? Bang, bang, you got the sticks out, or you got your finger out, right? All that stuff we did as kids growing up. Now kids are doing that, and guess what? They're doing it. They're setting an example, and they're kind of portraying what they're planning to do down the road, right? What that potential is going to be. That's the reality of their world. So the reality of what we're dealing with today is the amount of weapons kids have and the potential of them entering our schools. We're becoming a central hub to be able to have to lock down and put people through more of a very strict environment to enter our schools. Kids, anybody that enters our school should. We're getting to the point where they're going to have to enter through some kind of an audit system where they're checked through for weapons, where they're vetted. We don't want visitors in our schools anymore. There's a fine balance in my life that I believe has to happen, because I don't think kids should go to school in a prison mentality or go where they've got to be checked every time they walk in single file lines. But we're also getting to the point where we've got to do a much better job of vetting anybody that comes into our schools up front and making sure that they don't have weapons on them. Because, I mean, this kiddo just sat inside a bathroom, right? Posted a picture of the bathroom, said, "Now we wait." And inside that little bag he got into that school. And so how do we mitigate that when everybody potentially has access to weapons? We've got to do a better job up front of understanding the red flags and the things that come with, I think, the targeting of individuals early on, and giving them some support and some coaching and some mentoring around their mental health issues prior to them getting to that point. And that is a big on-taking, right? We're talking about a much bigger approach than probably we can do. But it is my biggest worry, is the amount of guns and access that people have out there to bring to our schools.
Well, you just moved right into pillar 2, right, which is our threat assessment. Yeah. How are we getting ahead of this? How are we actually paying attention to the information that we're getting? What is actionable? What can we enforce? Where do we need counseling? But that whole, pillar 2. So we go from climate and culture to pillar 2, which is threat assessment and managing that. And those are big issues to, move forward with. How do we prevent this stuff without crossing the line and violating individuals' rights, whether it be their First or their Second Amendment rights? And so those are tough issues. But you walked right into pillar 2, And then for those of you that haven't heard this before, I'm just going to throw out the 7 pillars, and then I'll kick it back to you, John, because I know you got a question. But when we talk about our areas of concentration that we should be concerned about, that if we pay attention to these areas, we can either minimize active shootings from happening, we can stop them before they start, or once they start, how do we manage it and get through it quicker? And so we already talked about pillar 1, which is climate and culture. Pillar 2 is threat assessment. How are we evaluating these threats, getting them to the right people so they can be addressed? Pillar 3 is target hardening. What are we doing environmentally to, Jeff was just talking about, vetting people getting into the schools, slowing down access, minimizing the number of accesses into schools. And then the real target hardening of how are we training individuals to respond and react once these things happen, whether it be see something, say something, or when it kicks off our thought process of evacuate, evade, defend, or lock down, lock out, whatever the procedure may be. And then, of course, pillar number 4 is all the tactics that are involved. And in the law enforcement world and security world, we spend a ton of time in that area. And those tactics, believe it or not, contrary to what some people do across the country, have changed and evolved dramatically from where we were at post-Columbine when we kicked those things off, our active shooter tactics, to where they're at now, incorporating school districts and fire and EMS and that entire thing. Pillar number 5 is training. How do we train across the board, our civilians to our professionals, to our law enforcement, to our security folks? And then Pillar number 6 is event management. How are we doing incident command? How are we managing these things once they kick off? Being present, making sure that we have the right resources in place. And then pillar 7 is post-event management. How do we bring the community and sometimes the country, heck, sometimes the world, back together to a sense of calm? So those are those 7 pillars. And we reference them quite a bit, but for those that hadn't heard them, at least they have an idea what we're talking about, those areas of concentration. But John, I'll kick it back to you because I know you're chomping at the bit. You got a question there.
Well, those are incredibly important pillars. If you have those pillars in place, your opportunity for success goes up exponentially. And your opportunity to recover is much easier, much better, because you have the pillars in place that provide the supports that are necessary, and our kids deserve that. Our kids deserve safe learning environments, and that's what just allows a safe learning environment is the focus on those pillars. Jeff, I want to talk about crisis management from your principal lens. We got a audience now around the world, which is kind of cool. From a principal lens, and you've been a principal during some really tough crisis events, some terrible tragedies. If you're a principal today and you have a tragedy in your school, what should you focus on? What's your priority? And what's your advice to administrators around the country that are living now as both principal and first responder of their school or emergency manager of their school?
The first thing I will say is you're never too prepared. I think the most important thing is to prep, and always believe that it can happen here. It can happen to you. It can happen to me. It can happen at any given time. I think the worst thing that we used to do for so long is that will never happen here. The things that are happening there will never happen on my watch in my building. That is, I think, the worst thing that we can do. We should take time to prepare for any given event. I love the pillars, but I will say this, AJ, those pillars should be uplifted and trained on every single day, not just from a law enforcement safety lens, but teachers and educators can train in those 7 content areas every single day.
Yeah.
Tactics are simply what we do in an education system to take care of kids, to make sure that they have the right access to restrooms and the right environment when they leave our classroom. What does it look like? How do they get good access? Every one of those pillars can be lifted up, elevated, and trained on every day in any capacity. It does not have to be law enforcement or security, right? Those are 7 true pillars that are important to anything we do. And so I would say to any administrator, I've had the unfortunate opportunity, I guess I would say, to lead through, as John said, some really tragic events. One that happened, as we said, the worst time of day, at a time we never thought would happen, during a time that we never trained for anything, before school started. Very similar to what happened yesterday in Iowa, right? There is nobody necessarily in an environment where we train for lockdowns. Everybody's in a classroom. You lock the door, locks lights, out of sight. Well, guess what? What happens when it's a lunchroom, or it happens during a passing period, or before school when nobody's even in classes? Do we train and prepare for that? Because if we don't, we should be doing more of it. Because unfortunately, tragedy and bad things happen at the worst times, right? They don't happen at the given time when we want them to. But what do we train like? We train when it's more efficient and convenient for us as leaders, right? So the first thing I would say is prep more, be prepared, and make sure you're aware of everything going on. The other thing is make sure that your community and your kids have an understanding of what leadership and event management and what it means to go through crisis prevention and crisis recovery. What does that mean to them, right? And it starts with the simplest of things. Don't wait for a large event. You know, what I've loved about what John brought here and what we continue to do is we have an amazing system where tragedy, no matter how small scale or large scale, we have a process that we follow and a protocol every single time the same way. That way, everybody's on the same page, no matter what level. and we train on it. We train our teachers, we train our administrators, we train our cabinet more than we've ever done before, because cabinet is eventually responsible for those big tier things that lead down, right? And so as we can train and we have that consistent practice, we've got to be able to make sure people are prepared for that. So those tabletop discussions we do, those events that people can just walk through and say, if this were to happen on my watch, what am I going to do? How am I going to manage this? Not just from a big lens, but we talk about those management teams in the school themselves. They should be doing more of this. Now, I will tell you from an educator lens and from my background, we often balk at, wow, I got to take more time out of the classroom and away from teaching to do these things. Well, guess what? An event happens and you're not sure what to do and tragedy strikes, you're out of the classroom, away from education for a long time. And the amount of work that you do leading up to that, to prevent it, to prepare for it, can mitigate how much time or minimize how much time you have away from your classroom to get back into the scope of work again and get kids back acclimated and your community acclimated again. So oftentimes there's that approach of, well, it's too much time to take. Well, I will tell you from experience, that time spent up front will save you a lot of time on the back end to get back into the realm and get back to work again, because there's that fine balance of what's more important, right? What are we going to strategize on when it comes to taking care of kids? Because eventually tragedy is going to come to our doorstep. It may be small scale. I always talk about it like a hurricane, right? You're in the path of a hurricane. Guess what? You might get the initial force, the big winds, you might get everything, but you might only get the outer skirts. Right? You might get a very small tragedy, but how are you going to deal with it? When the big storm comes, are you ready to deal with it no matter what that is? Because if you're not, and you haven't prepared for it, I will tell you from experience, it's not fun at the very end to try and come back and reapproach, what you've done and what you didn't do to prepare and get back into the saddle again and prepare kids and their community for life after a major tragic event.
How important is it to be present as a leader? In tragedy or day to day?
Number one is leaders have to be not just present, but they have to be connected prior to, connected during, and connected after. What I mean by connected prior to means if your community and your students have faith in you and trust, they know that if tragedy happens, everything you've done up front as a leader, they're going to have some respect and trust that you're going to handle that the right way. Present during is somebody out front being able to lead and lead with discernment, because I think discernment's a big piece of what we do, but also lead through tragedy without being stressed and without showing a lot of stress. You can have empathy, compassion, but at times, and I always say this about those warrior spirit leaders, they have that little switch they can twitch sometimes. You might be the most empathetic and compassionate person out there, but when you're leading through tragedy or something happens, that little switch flips and you become tunnel vision on what is my job now to get this community and these kids through this event. I'll take care of me down the road. But my job right now is to take care of the people I'm in charge of. And I think that's that warrior spirit. That's kind of what all the things that you lead up to as throughout your life lead you. And that calling I talked about, you have a calling to get there. That's that little switch that eventually goes off. And I had to learn that, right? I had to do that. And it's funny because you don't automatically in your mind go, wait, I need to turn that switch now. It just happens, right? I think that's just something that just clicks and goes, boom, my focus is now getting us back to and taking us through this tragedy and leading us through being present, as you said, during it, but then also being a really clear focus factor and present after the fact to make sure we get things back to where they should be as well.
It's a lot to process. And it's true. I mean, I think when I think of what you just said, I think part of this goes back to that training that we've done for so many years with AJ provides us that base level understanding of how critical it is to be able to flip that switch, to know when it's time to get real direct, focused, get to work, versus time to be that empathetic leader. Not everybody can do that.
Yep.
That's a real struggle for some. Those that are successful at it, though, and those that work at it. And AJ, can that be learned, or is that, I mean, is that inherent in you? Where does that come from?
Well, can it be learned? You know, there's that age-old argument, you know, can leadership be learned, or are you born with it? I think anything can be learned. Those that aren't born with those innate skills, though, it becomes much more difficult under stress, right? But you have certain leaders that thrive in those crisis situations. That's their spot to be in. And maybe they're not as good as the empathy or the empathetic side, you know, maybe afterwards. I think the world needs a little bit of both. Managing is one thing, leadership is the other. And, you know, you go through these courses and they'll bash on the management, or they'll say leadership can be too much, blah, blah, blah. And I think you need to find balance of both, right? But absolutely they can be taught. What happens, though, is under stress, when the sympathetic nervous system's kicking in and all that stuff's taking place, we fall back to where we are, where our strengths are. And that may be leadership, or that may be managerial. And where I think it becomes important is for the individual to understand that and know that if I'm going to fall back and I'm not great at leading in crisis, that they surround themselves with people that can keep them moving in that direction. That is important to understand kind of where your strengths are, and don't beat yourself up if you're better in one than the other. But I do think they can be learned. I think they can be taught. It's the individual's willingness to take it on and actually understand that those roles are very different.
Some of the best principals that I've seen in the business, when they know that they're not that person, they assign that role to that person within their team. And, you know, they're very clear about, that is not me, but I'm giving you the person that I have that's best at this. To me, that I always want to honor them and thank them for that, because it makes life a lot easier when we're managing a situation. We have a critical incident and we show up, and if you're that emotional leader that isn't able to manage through the tragedy, then we've got to have the person that can support us. And Jeff, you've seen that time and time again throughout your career.
I will add to this. I love you started this, John, with what's the number one thing you would tell principals across, and what you both just said exonerates the thinking of it's not going to happen on my watch, but it also edifies preparation and preparing for and giving people opportunity to practice these events. Because John, you pointed it right out. Not everybody has the right leadership mentality to lead through a tragedy, through stress. AJ talked about exactly, you might fall back to your training and what you're really good at, and it may not be the leadership piece. But good leaders understand that, and they put people in place to make sure that people are taken care of, and the weak spots are brought in. Somebody who's strong is brought into the weak areas and arenas through that training. So when we do our training here in Jeffco, we do these tabletops. We tell our leaders, bring your deans, bring others with you, because you may not be that one person that's always there, or the one person that we think can handle this, who is going to be the right person in those individual spots. And I think that comes with training. And train. AJ says all the time, we fall back to our training, right? When it comes to tactics, we always fall back to what our strength is and the training that we've been given. And so we just allow leaders or managers to go into a tragedy or a situation and say, well, do what you think you're innately able to do. We don't know what that's going to look like, right? We don't know what the outcome's going to be. But if we give them examples and allow them to train in that environment, which we do with AJ's team all the time, we learn from ourselves and we watch others, and we have that discernment I talked about earlier. We can discern what's the right places and the right puzzle pieces to put in place, so that when that tragedy does come, we're at least prepared, and making sure that we can make sure every single person is in the right environment to lead and manage or provide, whatever the support is that they can provide for that environment.
And I'd like to just push that out a little further, because I think when we started this conversation, we talked about principles, but that's just good leadership.
Yes.
Understand what I'm good at, what I'm bad at, and then having the ability to step away and say, all right, you know what? maybe this isn't my forte right here, and empowering the individuals whose forte it is to move forward and handle it and put your ego aside. That's good leadership. Surrounding yourself with people that complement your deficiencies, not people that think like you, or because they're your friends, or because it's easy. Good leadership is having those around you that complement where you're deficient, and then knowing where you can go to. And that's just not in the education world. And, those are some of our biggest successes maybe in law enforcement, and also some of our biggest failures, is because we think that, that individual needs to be the one in the forefront making these decisions, when some of the best stuff comes from when you would give your staff an idea, right? And let them move forward and create something that is much bigger than you could ever come up with.
Yep.
Or understanding, and I think that, we got to be careful when we talk about emotions, right? Because some emotions are good. There's that fire in your belly that's that no quit that's going to keep you moving forward, right? As long as you can maintain your thought process and your composure, and so each individual is unique, but, comes back to, again, relationships and understanding and working together and training and all those things we've been talking about.
This is a relationship business.
Yeah.
Right.
And we say it time and time again, but nobody can do this stuff alone. And if you don't build the relationships, you don't have the trust. If you don't have the trust, you can't win. And it starts there, it ends there. You fix that, you build that, you create and develop and nurture that, and now you've got something pretty special.
Yeah.
Let's take a break for a minute.
Yeah.
Defense, preserving property, protecting lives, providing peace of mind.
Well, this has been an amazing episode. And Jeff, I love your outlook on this business, and the work that we do, but I love your outlook on life. And, absolute joy to work with you for so many years and to see the direction you're now taking the work that we did for so many years in new places that I frankly couldn't have done. You have a different forte, a different skill set, and I love that because we each bring something different and unique to all of our lives and the work that we do, and then you hand it off to somebody and you hope that they continue it, but then they take it in places that you never dreamed of to make it bigger and better. And you're doing that every day, my brother.
Well, I appreciate that. And, I talked about the people that were so important in my life, and there's no two more better than the two that are on here with me right now, especially in the last 6 years with AJ, the last 14 with you, John. I think the world is a better place because of people like both of you. And we're in a much better place to take care of our most vulnerable environments and our kids in our schools because of the work that you two do every single day. And so I'm just, I'm so overjoyed to be a part of it. I have so much respect for you both. You've done so much for me. I've learned so much from both of you. But John, I wouldn't say it's going in a whole new direction. It's taking what you did. You built an amazing pillar and a gold standard for what school safety should look like in Jeffco. It was forced on us, but nobody could have done it better. Nobody could have put it where it's at. I think now our job is we're at a tipping point in society on where we go with school safety and security, even as from a larger lens as a national group. But we're taking that to that next level, and I think we're better understanding because we're learning from groups like AJ, and we're training and understanding best practice and the work that's happening across the nation. We've taken all that in, and we're saying, what can we do to take care of kids here in Jeffco, right? What's the best thing we can do? And we've learned so much from you two. And John, the foresight you had to bring me aboard, I can't thank you enough. I've truly enjoyed this work. I love what I do every day. I love my team. I love, where we're headed. But just to be a part of the bigger group and the bigger discussion that's going on, I know nationwide is really important and just very exciting for me as we move forward.
Well, it's been great. There's no, as AJ says, there's no more honorable work than protecting those that can't protect themselves.
Right.
And we get to do that every day. We're going to close this podcast out as we always do, and we always will. To us, the Centurions, and those like us, damn few left.
Damn few left.
Appreciate y'all.
Thank you to Safe Haven Defense for sponsoring today's podcast and for walking the Centurion's path with us. Safe Haven Defense, preserving property, protecting lives, providing peace of mind.